So this is our talk, Creating Creation, a Trail Through Conceptual Poetry. And maybe to start us off, we'll talk about what conceptual poetry is, and I won't be giving an exhaustive definition, but just a working definition to get us through this talk. So the first thing to say, I think, is conceptual poetry is a type of poetry. And by this, I mean that it aims to do exactly what all other types of poetry aim to do, which is, perhaps somewhat coarsely put, is to transcend our day-to-day levels of communication and perception, and to touch upon some aspect of being which is not expressible using words. And interestingly enough, this is done using words. So somehow this magic happens. So in this sense, it's the same as all other types of poetry. What sets it apart is the way this goal is achieved. So regular poetry works through a very central concept there is craft. I mean, through ingeniousness of craft, beauty is created, and this beauty arouses emotion, and this is where poetry meets its readers and starts its work. In conceptual poetry, it's almost craftless or craft-free. Yesterday we saw it's not the same, but I'll go with craftless. It's centered around a different mechanism. The central concept there is process. The work of conceptual poetry is usually the execution of a very simple, well-defined, well-documented process, and its execution materializes, hopefully in a very rich way, an idea, a concept, and this concept meets the reader's mind, and this is where it starts working. So these are poetries that work on very different levels to achieve the same goal. And I want to give maybe an intuition for that can come from the visual arts where we're more exposed to them, so maybe it's clearer to demonstrate it through that. So here's the analog to lyrical poetry, perhaps. It's the Mona Lisa, Da Vinci. You can see, I think, or you already know it, what I spoke about, it's ingeniousness of craft, creating beauty, creating emotion, and this is where the piece starts to work. And the equivalent is this seminal work, the conceptual equivalent is this seminal work from Duchamp, Marcel Duchamp, 1917, The Fountain, which is craftless. It's just a simple, very simple procedure of taking a ready-made object, putting it on a pedestal, putting that in a museum, and this materializes or explores the idea that art is possibly what we look at in the context of art. Anything that we will look at in the context of art is art. So this is all well known, but I think it demonstrates the difference. So today, when I say a trail through, I mean I won't be covering, of course, all conceptual poetry or nothing near that. That's not possible. I just selected a short path through it, which I thought would be interesting and perhaps even relevant in this context. And it's all about this creating creation, and by this I mean that I want to talk about this leap or this sort of even miracle that happens when you take words and they become art. They become a different word, means of communication entirely. If you put them in a certain order, the same words that are day-to-day words that you use in shopping lists or Facebook posts or work emails, suddenly when you put a bunch of them in a certain order, in a certain form, they become something completely different, a different type of matter. So I want to explore how that happens, and by close reading two works of conceptual poetry. And conceptual poetry is, I think, particularly lends itself to such observations because it's so transparent, because of this idea of process that you can see how the work is like a see-through engine. You can see exactly how the work is constructed. So maybe it's easy to see, or possible to see, where the magic starts to happen. So the first work I want to talk about is this one. And this is a work from 2018 by Canadian conceptual poet Christian Bok. And as you can see, there are several parts to it, and we'll go over all of them, but let me give you the bottom line of where I'm going with talking about it first. I want to talk about it to be centered around the concept which I'll call alignment of diversities. I think this is this poem's answer to the question of creation. And by alignment of diversities, I mean that there's this phenomena that if you take several elements which are very different, and you put this diversity, you put them together, all this diversity, and so a lot of interactions and contexts begin to happen in your mind, and things begin to get thick and open up with meaning. But if at the same time you manage to keep the whole thing from falling apart, you manage to keep it aligned in a tightly knit structure keep all of them aligned towards the same place, then as you keep adding more and more elements, there's a certain tipping point after which there's this transformation happens. It's as if the structure cannot contain any longer all this immense amount of context and interactions, but it also doesn't fall apart. And then the transformation occurs. And of course, you can't really say mathematically how many elements and etc., because it depends on the elements, on the type of alignment. But I think generally this is what is going on. So maybe this sounds a little bit abstract, but I want to show it very concretely in this work. So the first part I'll talk about is one part you're actually not seeing, and these are the notes that accompany the work that describe the procedure of how the work is made. So I'll read to you from them. The great order of the universe is a response to the 50th anniversary of the Lego patent. The image enumerates every possible way of combining two Lego bricks, each with 8 pegs. So this is the top part there. The poem starts with an image, actually. And I think it's a visually pleasing image. It's also intellectually interesting, like to get all the combinations. I find it also exciting in a sort of geekish way a little bit, because you immediately start messing with it. And did he really get all the combinations? How did he order them? What would happen if you have 2 by 2, etc.? But most of all, its take on the general concept of the great order of the universe is that it presents a very small, like sort of ideal universe which we can know everything about, and it enumerates all the knowledge about this universe. And this universe is just this 5 by 5 where you have 2 elements, and all their combinations are everything that exists in this universe. So this is the first element. The second element, there are 2 caption texts beneath, and let's read the first one. So this is from Democritus, the Greek philosopher. This is about 400 BC. And it's from a piece called The Great Order of the Universe, same as Bok's work. Atoms bombard the unplumbable void, plunging like silvery raindrops or drifting like twinkly hoarfrosts. And by coalescing, if kindred, they cause things to appear. And by separating, if opposed, they cause things to vanish. And from these interknit vectors, objects interlock, forever becoming one prolific universe, distinctive for its mild infinitude of forms. So this is a beautiful text, I think. It's both lyrical and very clear. And it's a text, it's not an image, so we already have 2 very different elements. And it's also describing a very different universe. It's describing the opposite, perhaps, the whole universe, everything that is in existence, how it comes to be, and what is the order that governs it. But at the same time, you can see, obviously, the similarity, because it's instead of Lego bricks, we have something called atoms, but the mechanism is the same. They come together, they're taken apart, and by this, everything comes to be. The other text is by another man, slightly later, some 2,300 years later, Gottfried Kirk Christiansen, and this is actually from the Lego patent number 3,005,282. Toy elements of this kind will be referred to generally as building bricks, and the principal object of the invention is to provide improved coupling means for clamping such building bricks together in any desired relative position, thus providing for a vast variety of combinations of the bricks for making toy structures of many different kinds and shapes. So, completely different texts in tone. It's not a scientific or philosophical, it's a legal document, actually, very technical. Still beautiful in a sense, because it's very clear and its use of language is very precise. And again, it describes yet another completely different universe. A universe where it's sort of, I think, the equivalent of Democritus for the world of Lego, for the image. It expands it to, if we have all Lego pieces, how will the world behave in this way? And it's also another big difference is that it's very utilitarian and Homo sapiens centered, like it's for our use, what we can do with Lego bricks. So we have these three elements all aligned to the same notion of describing the order of the universe, but all three very different from each other. And this is the point where Christian Bok weaves a magic spell of sorts. And I'll read to you from the notes again. The caption consists of two texts. The first, a translated paragraph from a volume by Democritus. The second, a transcribed paragraph from the patent by Gottfried Kirk Christiansen. The two paragraphs are perfect anagrams of each other. So here be the magic spell. Perfect anagrams means that if you take any of these two texts and you break it up into letters and you put the letters in a bag and you shake the bag and you spill them back on the table, you can construct the other texts letter by letter and you'll have no letters left over. So these texts are the exact equivalent of each other in both type of letters and number of letters, which is a pretty amazing feat in itself, but it also introduces a new element into this structure, which is from a completely different place. It introduces language itself as a set of Lego bricks of sorts, which we can combine and take apart to create, and we've just experienced this as readers, how different are the things that this universe of language can create. So we have a completely new element, which is pointing at the same direction, and it's actually also creating part of the other elements. So it's a whole new dimension of complexity here. And possibly this is where, for me at least, possibly this is where the tipping point happens, where the work becomes so rich that it can no longer be contained in your mind, even as a reader, and you have to experience it on a different level. But it goes on also, I think, the last thing, as you leave the work, you can again look at it as a picture, like we started looking at it as an image, but to look at the whole thing as an image. And then maybe you can notice that the whole thing looked at as an image actually resembles, in a way, a Lego brick, right? The way it's constructed. And I don't think this is a coincidence. It introduces yet another element, where the work itself demonstrates how each of its components is another element in a small order of the universe, quote unquote, of the work itself. So I hope as we're talking about it, I hope you at some point experience this leap from alignment of the diversities into like something completely different, which is what we call like art, or what the artistic effect, or what poetry aims to do. Yeah, let's talk about it. I want to talk about another poem, a much shorter one. It's from 1965 by Armenian poet Aram Saroyan. It's very short. I'll leave you with it for a few seconds so you can read it carefully. And again, let me give you the bottom line up front. I want to talk about this poem through a concept of productive error. I think there's something jarring about it. You probably noticed even from the 10 seconds you spent about it. It sort of stops you short. You try to read it, you try to interact with it. You know it's a poem, so you know what to do when you see a poem, but you can't really do it. It stops you. And in this sense, it's an error. It's a problematic poem. It's a bad poem because it doesn't give you what you need as a reader. But what makes it productive, I think, is that because someone somehow managed to create this error that it stops you on the one hand, but it also gives you something in return. And this something is a lot of new information, which you wouldn't have noticed if you would have just gone about your regular reading. And I want to show how all these types of information now start to emerge because you are jarred and stopped. And then tie it also to the same concept of alignment of diversities. So the first thing is maybe, let's start with a very simple question, maybe how many words long is this poem? So there's the obvious answer of 1, because it's 1 word. And there's also the obvious answer of 0, because this is not a word. And also I would argue that there's another answer of maybe somewhere between 1 and 2, because it's both a word and not a word. It's a word, because we all know that it's light, but there's also this extra layer of information of the spelling mistake. So it's somewhere between 1 and 2. So something as trivial as counting the number of words suddenly becomes more vague or less solid or less more dualistic. And another question we can ask, you've actually all experienced it now, is have you read this poem? I mean, can we read this poem? So again, obviously the answer is yes, you've just read it. But I think the answer is also not really, because there's no reading process in the normal sense. You look at this poem more like you look maybe at a sculpture or a photograph. So it's sort of, because it jars your reading, it brings it to this extreme case where there's only 1 word and it's not even a word, so reading also suddenly becomes not so obvious. And like what reading is exactly at this edge case. So this is the pattern here. This poem will take all these basic concepts and it opens them up. It shows that they're not, the only reason that they're so solid and non-vague is that you just don't think about them, or you just go, they're like that for the regular case, but when you start going to the edges, you see that they open up into something much less definite. Another thing we can talk about is because you cannot just read this word and move on, there's this slight delay between seeing it and understanding what it means. So it makes one reflect on the fact that there really is a gap between a word, and it was actually discussed yesterday in several of the talks. It was mentioned there's a gap between the word and its meaning, like its physical form and its meaning. It's not the same thing. And this word here has 2 senses, right? It's the opposite of, or not heavy and not dark. So if we look at it for a minute as the not heavy, let's start with that. So the word light as not heavy, if you look at it from the physical, at its physical form, it's not very light, isn't it? Like it's 5 characters long. It's not an ideal choice for a word whose semantics is not heavy. Like the average length of a word in English is 4.7 characters. So that's even longer than the average. And this is for a word that should mean not heavy. And the gesture he does of doubling the GH actually is also a bit vague, because it both makes it worse, because it takes it to 7 characters, but it also makes it better, I think, because he actually doubles the part. He notices, the poet, that the GH is slightly of a different material than the L and the I and the T, right? It's the part that has no sound. I mean, not exactly no sound, but almost no sound. And so it's, in a sense, it's the more airy part of the word. And when you double it, you sort of get the word is longer, but it's also less dense, in a sense. So it's actually making it longer and lighter at the same time. So it's interesting. And again, follows the same pattern of making things vaguer or more dualistic and exposing the tension between these two patterns of the words. I have time for one more. So let's look at light as the opposite of dark. And here, again, if we look at the physical form of the word, you can see it's exactly opposite than the semantics, because it's dark, like literally dark, right? The word, any word, you're right, is dark because it has ink and it blocks the white of the paper. So there's again this tension there between the physical form and the semantics. And also, and I think this is also a nod to the dual nature of light from physics, he shows us there's also this duality in the word itself. On the one hand, it's one word, it's a particle of meaning. On the other hand, you can see, and the doubling of the GH accentuates this, that it's also a stream of characters that is moving from left to right. So it's at the same time, it's one thing, but it's also a movement. And this doubling of the GH even has this nice wavy pattern to it, which is also a nod, I think, to the nature of light. So we see here, I'm wrapping this up. There are other elements which we can talk about, but I want to leave time. So I hope you see that it opens up multiple contexts, and here I'm tying back to alignment of diversities. It opens up multiple channels of new information, this poem. But all this information is aligned in the same direction. It's very different from each other. We talked about physical form versus semantics, about the limits of reading, about counting. So all of these are very diverse in nature, but they're all aligned towards the same idea that things are, the fact that things are solid is not sort of a law of nature or deterministic. It's not the law of nature. It's just an artifact of what state we're in as readers, in a sense. And anything as trivial as counting, as reading, can be taken to the limits, and then it opens up and demonstrates a completely different nature, much less solid. So, so this is what I leave you with, I think, these two poems. Thank you.